Welcome to the universe in a seashell, the podcast dedicated to science, life, and girl power. I'm Matthew Bartek, and I'm your host. I'm a PhD, an author, and I want to make this world a more equal and opportune place, one girl at a time. Welcome to the podcast. It's Kara Bartek and I'm your host. Today I have a very special guest. His name is Matthew Bartek and he is a plant breeder and geneticist. And he specializes in something called sorghum. So we're going to find out what all that stuff is about. But first, I have a few housekeeping items that I want to touch base on. Number one, where can you find the podcast? Of course, we're on Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you can find your podcast. Please be sure to rate us, review, leave a comment, and tell your friends. Because your feedback matters to me. I want to know what you like, what you don't like. But it also helps raise our visibility. Because the universe in a seashell is all about making this world a more equal and opportune place, one girl at a time. And I can't do that alone. I want to make science happen for you and for your friends. Okay? You can also drop me a line at universeinaseashell@gmail.com. That's universeinaseashell@gmail.com. Send me your show topics. Send me your ideas. Let me know why you love science, why you don't love science, or just drop me a line. Again, the email is universeinaseashell@gmail.com. Okay, so Matt, Cece and I have been doing something for the past couple of shows where we had a science joke. Do you like science jokes?
I do.
Okay. I've got one for you.
Okay.
What did the buffalo say to his son when he left for college?
I have no idea.
Bye, son.
That sounds like a CC joke.
Okay, the greatest thing about science jokes is that they're kind of lame, but they're pretty funny, right?
Oh yeah, they're pretty fun.
It kind of reminds me of the old double bubble. Now, what do you mean a kid's joke? What is that supposed to mean?
Because kids' jokes are funny.
Funnier than grown-up jokes?
Unless they're dad jokes, and yes.
Okay, do you have any good dad jokes?
No, I really don't. Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay. Cece's a better joke teller than you. You know that, right?
I know.
So I don't know if I've said this before, but Matt Cece's dad. He's also my husband. So Matt is something that's called a sorghum breeder and geneticist. So he and I, if you've been following my Facebook page, you know that I have been out in the sorghum fields this week collecting research data, and this is part of the business that you and I operate, which is for the most part really the brainchild of you, because this is your background. See, Matt has what's called a doctoral degree in sorghum breeding and genetics. So this is really kind of a very, very specialized knowledge. So do you want to tell us exactly what, because we need to start at the most basic levels, because I have a feeling that nobody knows exactly what plant breeding and genetics is the same way I had no clue. And what sorghum is. But I think we need to start at the very beginning and just try to figure out what exactly is a PhD, and why would somebody need a PhD to be a sorghum geneticist? What's that about?
So first of all, a PhD is just a degree that takes a really long time to get. You're in school for a really long time, but
How long?
Well, after you graduate from regular college, you have to go to college for another 5 years to
What?
get your PhD. But if you enjoy learning and you enjoy science and you enjoy what you're studying, then it doesn't seem like a really long 5 years. It can be really enjoyable.
Okay, wait. We need to do the math on this. Okay. So you're in school for 12 years through high school, right?
That's correct.
Then you
Hopefully, only 12.
Yes. Okay, and then you go to college for 4 years.
Yes.
Okay, so where are we at? 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, and then now do you always have to have a master's degree to get a doctoral degree?
In science, you usually do. There's a few exceptions, but you most always have to have your master's degree first.
How long? You think 2 years?
2 years for your master's degree is typical.
And then okay, so that's another 2 years. So what are you 16? So that we're up to 18 years. Okay, and then
Another 3 years for your doctorate.
3?
Now,
Okay.
usually 3.
18.
That'd be 21 years total.
Okay. Now, when you're 8 years old, 11 years old, that seems like a really long time.
I'm gonna be at school forever. Yeah.
Did it feel like a long time?
No, it really didn't. When you're a kid, time seems to move much slower, and I understand. Trust me. If you had told me when I was 8 that I'd be in school for 21 years, I'd have laughed and said, "There's no way that's gonna happen." But when you get older, your interests change, and some of you may actually start to enjoy school, like I did.
Now, I always enjoyed school.
I didn't always enjoy school when I was younger, but the older I got, the more I did enjoy it, the more I enjoyed learning. And when I found science and found plant breeding, it made school even that much more enjoyable. I liked going to class. You remember, you knew me when I started graduate school. Right when we first started, it was, I went to class and I studied. But when I got into plant
You
breeding,
kind of went through the motions.
yeah, I went through the motions. But when I got into plant breeding, I think you could tell also that there was a change, and I enjoyed going to class and studying and learning. So,
I think this is important because I think that this is a huge holdback for a lot of people in science because number one, science can certainly be boring based upon who the teacher is. But number two, a lot of times it can feel very intimidating, like maybe the subject matter is too much. You're never going to be able to grasp it. So can you talk to us a little bit about what it was like to have that breakthrough for yourself where you went from, oh my goodness, I don't think I could go to school for 21 years to this was, my life's work. What was that like? How did it happen for you?
like I said, it was just something that you had to find interest in. A really good friend of mine, we were taking this class together, and he was a graduate student. He was working on his master's degree in cotton breeding, and I was still an undergrad working on my degree in agronomy. And it just so happened I lucked out and had a good professor teaching a class on plant breeding, and I really enjoyed it. And it'll happen differently for everybody, but that's what it was for me. I took a class on plant breeding, and for the first time in a long time, it's something that I really understood well. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed studying about it. I would just talk about it. I remember you and I talking. You're like, enough with the plant breeding class. So it's just one of those things. It's different for everyone, but when you find something you enjoy, I think you'll know it.
What was it? What was the feeling that you got?
Oh, just this feeling of, wow, maybe this is what I was meant to do. I finally grasped. I finally understood how to do something really well. Uh, it was the first class that I enjoyed studying for, and I wanted to learn more. I was learning more than they asked me to. Like, I could have studied and just studied for the test, but this was the first time that I would go out and I would say, well, that was interesting, and that's all I had to study for the test, but I want to learn more about it, and that's what I would go do.
So it took you a while to find your passion.
Yeah, you could say that. But when I found that it was all worth it.
Okay. Now, your specialization is in a crop called sorghum. Now, I know what sorghum is because that's our daily life, but I'm not sure a lot of people out there know exactly what sorghum is. Could you talk to us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so grain sorghum, it's just like it sounds. It's a grain, but it looks different than a lot of grains that you see. To me, as I always tell
Now, wait a second. Now, we're in agriculture, so grain is a very common term to us. what is grain? When you say grain, what does that mean? How is that classified?
Well, so different crops are grains. Like corn is a grain, wheat is a grain. It just means it's a little hard berry, almost like I'm simplifying it, but that's essentially what it is. But sorghum is a little small round berry that all grows in clumps at the very top of the plant. And it's not a berry like you would see on a tree, but it's round and
It's not like a strawberry.
no, it's not like a strawberry. It's a grain, but it forms at the top of a plant. So it's planted in rows, just like corn or cotton or soybean or whatever it is that grows where you live. That farmers get out there with their big tractors and plant it in straight lines. It's grown like that, and then at the end of the year, most of the time the seed is red, and so it sits at the top of the plant, and it makes the whole field look just completely beautiful and red.
It is really a pretty crop.
It is. I mean, you can have white grain. You can have white grain or white seeds, but usually in America we grow red seeds.
Okay, now what is sorghum commonly used for? So because now you and I we love Chopped, and
Yes.
we've seen because that's one of my favorite things are all those crazy ingredients like a pig tongue. I'm trying to think of some other crazy. It looks like sometimes if they get like the things that are used in salad, they just go out and like pick a bunch of weeds.
Yeah.
I think they've used dog toenails a couple times.
Foraging. Yes.
Foraging. Now,
Foraging is just when you go out and find stuff in the wild and
oh,
pick it
okay.
to eat.
So anyway, so they have these crazy ingredients, and twice now on Chopped, we've seen people use sorghum, and the chefs are always like, "What is this?"
They always don't know how to cook it either. So
Well, yeah, because it's such an unusual crop. So, I mean, so obviously this is not something that we're eating every day. So corn, yes, I eat corn on the cob. I've got frozen corn, canned corn. Corn goes in a lot of things that we eat. You said wheat is a grain, right?
yes.
Well, wheat, okay, we use it in breads. We use it in bagels, donuts, all of my favorite things.
But see, that's what's weird is people should know it. It's the seventh most grown grain in the world.
What do you mean we should know it?
We should know it. The United States is one of the very few places in the world where it's not very common for people to eat sorghum.
Now, why would that be?
There's lots of different reasons, but I think one of the big reasons is that we have other grains that people enjoy more, like corn and soybeans and rice and wheat. But sorghum is very, very popular, and we use our grain sorghum in the U.S. for other things, like cattle feed. That's the most common. We just harvest it and we send it to be used in cattle feed.
Cows like it.
Cows love it. Cows, chickens, lots of those things love it.
Okay, so here's the big thing. I've got an opinion on what sorghum tastes like, but you're the expert, so let's hear it. How do you rate sorghum on a taste scale?
That's the great thing. I rate it very high because it tastes like absolutely nothing.
Wait a second. What do you mean?
It tastes like nothing. Everybody wants to know, everybody when you get, and I learned this when I was in school because we used to make what they called pop sorghum. So that's just another way you can prepare sorghum, is you can pop sorghum just like you pop popcorn. It's not very big because the grain is so small, but the seed's so small, but it'll just pop. But if you ever want to know what true popcorn tastes like without all the butter and salt, eat a handful of pop sorghum, then eat a handful of popcorn. There is a ton of flavor in regular popcorn compared to just regular sorghum. But that's why I rate it so high, is because you can flavor it however you want to.
Now, sorghum has another very special use, and this has to do with people who have gluten intolerances. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about that and why this is very unique for those folks who maybe have celiac disease or just a gluten sensitivity, which, by the way, is it's a very hot topic nowadays, and we know a lot of kids at the elementary schools who do have this condition, who do have this sensitivity. So how does sorghum fit in there?
So celiac disease, like you said, is just the body can't break down gluten, which, gluten is a compound found in a lot of breads, specifically wheat. Bread's made from wheat.
Well, what is gluten?
It's a compound. I don't want to get too scientific or too complicated with it, but it's a compound. It's an ingredient found within wheat and some other things that you make breads out of, that a body of somebody that has celiac disease, they have a hard time processing and breaking that down and digesting it.
But when you mix a wheat flour, it's the stuff that kind of makes it feel soupy, right?
Yes, but
It gives it that soupy, sticky feel, right?
Yeah, but it also helps it rise. So if you ever see risen bread that rises and it's real airy and fluffy, a lot of that has to do with the amount of gluten. So where sorghum
So
can
you're
fit
saying
in,
it kind of makes it stick together?
well, not necessarily stick together, but expand under heat. Now,
Without breaking?
Yes. Now that's food science. So to get real complicated, maybe that could be another guest for the podcast. Is food science, because it's a huge science. But what you will notice is sorghum. You can make bread out of sorghum, uh, but it doesn't really get big, tall, and fluffy and airy like a bread you usually make from wheat that you buy at the store. So those are some things you can do with sorghum.
Now, I've seen sorghum pastas.
Yes.
And again, this is another application, right, for the people with the gluten sensitivities.
Oh, there's so many things you can make out of sorghum. I mean,
What's the most unusual thing you've eaten with sorghum?
Sorghum pancakes. That was strange. Sorghum pancakes.
What did they taste like?
They tasted like nothing. But that's what's great. We were at a sorghum conference, and so we ate our meals. Everything we ate was made or had sorghum in it, and it was just strange. It would be great at home because you could put chocolate chips or whatever you wanted, pumpkin spice or whatever you wanted to make it flavoring. But yeah, it's just unusual. You had this big filling piece of pancake that tasted like absolutely nothing.
So it's great to put syrup on, right?
Oh, fantastic.
Okay, so now we're calling it sorghum, but it's got other names, right?
Yeah, a lot of farmers and stuff will call it Milo.
Mm-hmm.
If you're out, so I don't know how many of you guys listening are in the Midwest, but whenever I go up there, so I do a lot of work in the Midwest and talk to farmers up there, and I have a hard time adjusting from down here because whenever they're out farming,
well, you got to say where you're at, because I think that this is important.
We're kind of in south central Texas, exactly halfway between Houston and San Antonio. So we don't grow a lot of soybeans down here. But down here we call soybeans. But if you go to areas where they're growing a lot, they just go, yeah, I'm growing beans. And you're like, pinto beans, black beans, what kind of beans we talk? But it's just common knowledge that when a farmer in, say, Minnesota is talking about beans, they're talking about soybeans. Well, the same is for people that grow grain sorghum down here. When they just say, I'm going to go cut grain or I'm going to go farm grain, they're talking about grain sorghum. So grain sorghum, Milo, or just plain grain, depending on who you're talking to.
So some of our friends who might be listening, maybe their parents are farmers, mm-hmm. maybe their grandparents are farmers, and yeah. they probably, there's a high chance that they're growing sorghum, but they may not know what it is because we're calling it a different word, right?
Yes.
Okay, so where are the areas? So you kind of briefly mentioned that. What are the areas that grain sorghum is grown in here in the U.S.?
So the number one region, it's two main regions that grow sorghum, which we're working really hard to expand those areas. When I say we, I'm saying me and myself and other people that have are interested in seeing grain sorghum used more in the U.S. But the main area is in the Kansas area, up in western central Kansas. The second major region is from the Corpus Christi area, Texas, all the way down to the Rio Grande Valley at the border of Mexico, down towards Brownsville and McAllen and Harlingen.
So some of our friends that are driving around, say down in South Texas or in Kansas, there's a good chance that they could look out and see some.
It's very well this time of year, so it's early for the Kansas growing season. But if you look out the window down anywhere in Corpus Christi or south of there, you're going to see red fields, and that's grain sorghum because we're getting close to harvest.
Okay, so now, you are what's considered a plant breeder and geneticist. So now, when I think of genetics, I'm thinking human genetics. I'm thinking animal genetics. I'm not thinking plant genetics. When we're in school, when we're beginning to understand the whole genetic thing, because we start off with the Punnett square, right? That's probably the most common.
Which is plant genetics.
That was all. That was all based on the. Yeah. But then we immediately go into human genetics.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to us a little bit about plant genetics, because I think that this is something, at least for me, I don't usually think of plants having DNA, and number one, and then number two, that DNA is really important.
The DNA is really important. So, and the advances in science when it comes to plant genetics is getting so advanced. A lot of the stuff that exists now in the science of plant genetics didn't exist 7 years ago when I was in school. It was all theories and ideas we had, and now it's a reality. So, plant genetics it's complex, like because it's still genetics, but no, it's an interesting field that's growing, but it's very predictable in a lot of cases. Not so much in others, but it allows us to actually predict what plants will look like based on what the parents look like.
Okay, so my thing is with science is I love science because it kind of it lets us see exactly how things work. And once you understand how things work, then you can do things either to change the course of events, maybe create a technology, whatever that it might be. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the reason that plant genetics is very important is because you're actually changing the crop in some way that's important. Is that right?
So basically what plant breeders do. So anytime you drive past a field of corn or a field of soybeans or a field of cotton or whatever it is that's being farmed, the seeds that farmer plant were developed by a plant breeder at one point in time.
But why? Why does that matter?
Because we have to make sure that the genetics in that plant are the best genetics for that environment. So the corn they grow in Kansas and Iowa is not the same corn that we will grow in, say, outside of LaGrange, Texas. It's a different set of genetics. It's the same plant, same corn. Corn is corn, but the genetics are different, and that goes with every crop. You have to have the best seed, most adapted seed for that environment, and that's where the plant breeders come in.
Now, I saw a picture of a banana some years ago, and this has always stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a side by side comparison of a banana that I would eat basically any day. It's the banana that you have at breakfast that you put on your oatmeal. But then right next to it was this banana, and it was like an alien banana. It was filled with this weird looking brown thing. And I was looking at it and I was trying to comprehend what is inside of this thing. And I realized it was seeds.
Mm-hmm.
And it was these big, gnarly, gross seeds that I think it would be almost impossible to eat a banana like that. And I realized that the bananas that we eat in the grocery store, they don't have seeds.
No.
So what's
that's thanks to plant breeders.
So is it the same concept with crops? So the long and the short of it is that it was trying to show that, look, here's this fruit that we start off with in the beginning. It probably has a great flavor. Mm-hmm. It's probably very nutritious, but it's very difficult to eat, and you're not going to get the most nutrition that you possibly could out of it.
Well, let's back up. So not all plant breeders have PhD. Plant breeders have been around for as long as humans have been around, but that's what's really interesting about it. But nobody thinks about it that way. So the very earliest plant breeding was done by people that just, almost caveman-like people, and that's how we found a lot of the crops that we eat now. So they would have these crops out there, and they would have a field of, say, berries, and they're like, wow, this set of berries, these are sweeter, these grow better, these are bigger. We don't have to pick as many to get full. So what they'll do is they'll take berries from that bush and replant the seeds, because they're picking the best berries for their, for the taste and the, how much they're going to get off of it. So when they do that, that's essentially plant breeding.
So, okay, so that's plant breeding. Okay, Penny's in here. Penny, you got to say hi. You want to say hi?
Hi. It's early morning and she just woke up.
Now, Penny, you can't beep into the microphone like you did that one time. Penny loves to see. So when we record in this software that's called GarageBand, and you can talk into the microphones, and it's really cool because you can visually see your voice. So it's got all these peaks and waves. It's a waveform that you see, and it develops on the screen. Penny kind of likes that, so she'll beep into the microphone and make the waves jump, don't you? Oh,
You want
she's
to
too
talk to
tired.
everybody?
You want to do a few beeps?
I saw a red bird on that.
You saw a red
Yeah.
bird out the window? Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That pretty red bird. But anyway, but so is that what you're saying that you do with crops? Is your
Yeah, that's exactly what we still do with crops, but we just use a lot more new technology to do it. So when those guys were finding the berries that grew best in that environment, and that's what they selected to replant because it got the most berries for the village, that's what we do now. But like I said, we just do it with more science. We grow the best seeds for every environment, but we use plant breeding. The basic knowledge of the old Punnett Square we learned in junior high, combined with genetics, molecular genetics and science, to find those best plants.
now? Okay, so let's talk more specifically about why this is important. So, what are the things that can happen to crops in the field that make it necessary? Because I have a feeling that there are certain characteristics that you really need to make sure that crops make it, that we can get it to our tables, that we can get it to our animals.
The three major things that affect crops that we as plant breeders try to find resistance to. And if y'all don't know what resistance is the ability, it's kind of like how your body can fight off infections. So a lot of times you get sick, but your body will build up immunity, or you get an injection for it, or a shot for it. That's building immunity. Then you have resistance. Well, we look genetically for the same thing in plants. We can't always give the plants a shot. So what we do is we naturally breed in resistance to certain things. So the three things we look for most in plants are the three things that affect plants the most in the field are drought, disease, and insects. All of those things are very important to plant breeders to make sure that when we put them out in the field and these farmers are growing them, that they have the best chance of avoiding those diseases and insects and surviving drought if their area is known for drought.
Okay, you said drought, disease, and insects.
Yes.
Okay, let me start with drought, because this is something that, and I think a lot of kids that are out there who care about the earth and the environment, this is a big deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, one thing that can get added to crops is water, right?
In some areas, not
So,
in every
and
area.
okay, wait, and I don't mean rainwater. I mean irrigation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the less irrigation, the better from a conservation perspective. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so to have a drought-resistant crop, we don't mean a crop that just doesn't need water at all, right? We mean a crop that when it gets
Rain-fed. So we in agriculture we call it dry land. And when we say dry land, I mean we're not adding any additional water. We're letting nature water the field for us.
So I can see how this is a huge plus when we're talking about the
huge.
environment.
Yes.
Now, how does sorghum stack up?
Sorghum uses a lot less water than most crops out there. So the crop that sorghum is most compared to is corn. So usually in areas where corn won't grow, people plant sorghum. If you go up into a lot of areas where they do pivot irrigation, where there's these big crop circles, they'll plant
And a pivot, and for anybody who doesn't know what a pivot is, what does it kind of look like?
It
Is
just
this a
looks
big,
like a
massive
big
contraption?
circle. Yeah, from the sky, it looks like a big circle.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a pipe that runs. I mean, they vary in size, but it's got wheels on it. And so at the center is the hole in the ground that reaches the water, and it pumps it up. And it's got these big wheels on it, and it's just a big structure that's real long, and it goes in a circle and waters crops.
And it sprays water.
It sprays water, yes.
Okay. So we've got drought. So drought, and for a lot of those kids that are out there who are thinking about the future of the world when they're thinking about the environment, this is something important. Now, okay, so we already kind of established. Okay, sorghum is good with that.
Let me. When I was talking about those pivots, what I was saying about sorghum was everywhere there's water, so everybody farms in big squares up, where they have those center pivots. Well, the thing about sorghum is they'll put corn or cotton inside everything that's getting water, but it's a square, so there's four corners. Guess what they put where there's no water? That's usually where they plant the grain sorghum because it
doesn't need any water.
It doesn't get any water from the irrigation, but it has the best chance of surviving and growing into a crop they can harvest.
Now, here's something that I hear a lot of these days is that we're running out of water in some places.
Yeah. So it's, the water is getting more scarce in certain areas. This is a very unusual year. We're getting way above average rainfall. It's actually so high that a lot of farmers in, Iowa and Kansas, Nebraska, they can't even plant because it just won't stop raining or the fields are flooded. It's an unusual year, but yes, as far as irrigation and groundwater, uh, yeah, there's certain areas where they're running out of it.
So are other plant breeders like you working on this drought resistant and other crops? Because we lived in Lubbock, Texas for several years, and I know that this was a huge issue. Was their groundwater was depleting at a very fast rate that they weren't. They weren't predicting this, and
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of it had to do with population. There was a ton of factors, but anyway, the long and the short of it was that they needed to grow crops that weren't using a lot of this
Yeah.
groundwater so we could preserve that for the people.
And I honestly don't know a single plant breeder who part of what they're working on for their crops is drought tolerance. The thing about irrigation is it's expensive. Nobody wants to have to put irrigation on. So the more drought tolerant, even in places that have irrigation, the less water you need to put on your crops, the better it is for the farmer because it costs them less money to grow that crop. So that's a big thing. Plant breeders should always be working in we don't just think about, what we can do for this crop or what's it going to yield. Our end goal is to help farmers, and that's who plant breeders should be working for. So, making a crop or developing a crop that makes them have to put less water, that would be a good win, a good plus for them.
And then also things that are good for the environment,
And
right?
good for the environment. The less water we have to pump out of the ground, that is excellent for the environment.
Okay, so we've got drought, we've got disease.
Hmm.
Talk to us a little bit about disease. Why is that something that plant breeders are working towards, or why do they care about it?
Well, see that's a big part of the company you and I run together is our agricultural research company. So different areas of the United States will grow the same crop. When I say the same crop, I mean we'll grow corn or we'll grow sorghum or we'll grow cotton or soybeans. But the difference is those different areas that they're grown in have different diseases. They have different soil diseases. They have different airborne diseases and funguses and all kinds of things. So that's why it's important to do what you and I do is allow these companies to see allow the plant breeders to see, hey, I have all of these thousands of hybrids, but I know they're all different. They're going to react to the diseases different. But I have to put them in all these different places because every place has different
But
diseases.
wait a second. Why does disease matter to somebody who's just in the grocery store who's trying to buy a bag of flour?
Oh, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
Well,
They're not. Well, the disease in those crops. The crops that they're seeing when they're buying those products at the grocery store. The only way they made it into that grocery store usually is because they didn't have any diseases in the field.
but hasn't there been a time when diseases in crops could truly affect the health of people?
Oh, a long time ago, the Salem witch trials they think was caused by plant diseases.
So this is a food safety issue.
Oh, of course. I think, but at the same time, I think that we've gotten to a point where we really regulate, what food enters into our grocery stores. It's pretty safe.
Yeah, but this is kind of more of a function of time,
Yeah.
the time that we're in.
Yeah.
Ultimately, isn't breeding disease resistance all about making the food safe for people?
Yeah. So if it's disease resistant, what do you typically do if your crop has a fungus or a disease? You try to go out there and spray something on it. So if it's disease resistant, that's less chemicals you're going to have to spray on it, which is less chemicals we're putting into the environment, which is less money spent by the farmer. And so it's all in all, it's good for the environment, it's good for the crop, and it's good for the people eating it at the end.
Okay, so we've got drought, disease, and then pests. Now, what we're talking about bugs.
Bugs, yeah.
Okay, what do bugs do to sorghum? What do they do to corn? What do they do to
Oh,
things?
where to even start? Yeah. uh, so there's different kinds of bugs. So as soon as you put that seed in the ground, something's trying to attack it. You have soil-borne insects. When it starts coming up out of the ground, you have what they call seedling insects when it's a really small plant.
Okay,
As
are we talking worms? Because you know that I cannot stand worms.
there's worms, there's little beetles, there's little flying insects called aphids. There's so
Penny, what is your favorite bug?
It's a horn.
A horn beetle?
A horn beetle.
Now, are horn beetles on row crops?
I don't think we really have to worry about many horn beetles in agriculture here. But yeah, so every stage of the crop, there's something trying to attack it. So there's a lot of times we can find resistance to these bugs through plant breeding, and through finding new genetics
Okay.
and breeding those genetics into the crops we sell to farmers.
Because what happens because you and I have been in this situation, we go out there and we see, for us, sugarcane aphid, and we go, golly.
Yeah.
Now we're going to have to call the farmer and we're going to have to tell him to do what?
Spray.
So, and because this is a tough thing for a lot of people, because sometimes people think about pesticides, they think about, the chemicals. For example, right now a big one is Roundup, and it's a little scary.
Yeah, some of these chemicals can get pretty scary. The scariest chemicals, whenever I would start getting real anxious about chemicals and be really, really safe. Well, I'm always really safe, but the ones that frighten me the most are the insecticides.
How do they work?
A lot of them work in different ways. Some of them they'll affect the insect if the insect eats the plants and then it swallows the chemicals that's inside the plants, inside the leaves. And sometimes the chemical will touch the insect and kill it. They function in different ways depending on the insect you're trying to kill.
Because some of them work on their nerve systems, right? Their nervous systems.
Some, yeah. I mean, essentially, you're shutting down their nervous system. Some of them they'll eat it. It'll just tear up their insides and stuff. Like BT. But there's lots of different types of insecticides, and I don't want to get too complicated with it. But just know there's a lot of different types of insecticides that affect them different ways. Some will go into the plant. Some will just stay on the surface of the plant. But there's a bunch of different ones that we have to make sure that we can produce enough food for everybody to eat.
So the bottom line is that the less that you have to spray row crops, the better. Not only because it's expensive, it's difficult to put on there, but it's safer, right? It's less chemicals that are going into the soils, going onto the crops. Is that correct?
Oh, of course. You don't want a lot of chemicals in your soils. And so that's one of the things they tell farmers a lot, and is we rotate crops. If you ever hear of something called a crop rotation, so one year you'll plant soybeans or cotton, and then the next year you'll plant corn or sorghum. That's so that you're not putting a lot of the same chemicals into the ground every single year. But regardless of what farmers are planting, the less chemicals going onto those plants and into the soil is better for the environment.
Yeah, because I'm all about the environment. I think that this is one of the big things that scientists, particularly scientists of the future, are going to be thinking about is what can we do to make sure our Earth is safe, clean, and enjoyable for everyone.
Oh yeah, and that's what a lot of people. There's been a lot of concern lately about pesticide and just overall pesticide, insecticide, herbicide use in agriculture. And one of the things that all plant breeders are working for is to reduce the amount of chemicals farmers have to spray by trying to find natural genetic resistance to these diseases and insects. So if we don't have it yet, I can guarantee you plant breeders of every crop are working on finding those resistance traits.
And that's my thing about sorghum. I really love sorghum. I feel like it's one of those things it's a crop of the future, because in the future, we're not going to have as much water.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to have as many acres to farm with, because we're starting to see acres go down.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a bigger bang for our buck, so to speak, when we're out there growing. We need to have something that's nutritious.
Yes.
Something that's high yielding. Something that's safe for us to eat. And do you think sorghum ticks all those boxes?
I think it ticks them for a certain amount. I mean, nobody wants to just go through life eating only grain sorghum. But I think it can replace a lot of foods at a really cheap cost. So, as our girls definitely know, I travel quite a bit. And so a lot of the places I travel, not in the United States, it's very common to see people eating sorghum and drinking sorghum. They make, drinks out of it, in Africa and Europe. And in Asia, they make a lot of drinks out of sorghum, and they eat a lot of sorghum. They make flatbreads, almost like tortillas or pita breads out of it.
Roti.
Roti, yes. In India, they make a lot of food out of sorghum. So it's just, I think it needs to become more common in the U.S. But from a very young age, the first thing we start learning, the most common grain I think we eat here is either rice or corn. But sorghum, I think, could fit a lot of diets in the U.S., and I think it would be a good thing for us to start eating more of it.
And a lot of our sorghums have very high nutrition, right? Antioxidants?
Yes. So I was fortunate when I was in college at Texas A&M. My professor had started working on a sorghum. So most sorghum, like I said, we grow is red, a reddish color. The seed is a reddish color or a white or almost a cream or yellow color. But one of the things my professor started working on is he developed one that made black seeds, very, very black seeds. And I can get complicated, but I'm not going to. But anyways, at the end of the season, when it's ready for harvest, the seed is black. Well, one of the things about that black seed is it's high in a compound called antioxidants. So those antioxidants are really, really healthy. And the fact that we found them in sorghum is really interesting as we start putting it into foods. And it's in foods now.
Well, it's very clear that you have a passion for sorghum.
I could go on about this all day. Like those times you tell me, Matt, enough.
Okay, Matt, enough.
Okay.
So sorghum, to wrap it all up, it's milo, it's grain, but ultimately what we call it is sorghum. And what is it? Sorghum bicolor?
Sorghum bicolor.
Okay.
So this might be it. You heard it here.
Matt, enough.
No, I'm just saying, like I had an interest. Go out and learn more about it. See if it's something you want to learn outside of what we're telling you.
I'm going to definitely have a lot of resources up, but sorghum is in many ways a very innovative crop for our future because it doesn't use a lot of water, doesn't have a lot of chemical input. It's very nutritious.
And you can use it in a lot of things, not just the grain you see.
And a plant breeder is somebody who uses science to
improve crops.
And
help farmers.
Okay, now, so we know you're a sorghum breeder. We know that you actively work in the sorghum industry. You own a sorghum company. But one thing that I think is most special about you is that you are the dad of 2 really awesome scientists.
Yes.
So, talk to us. Girls in science, what does it mean to you?
For me, it's becoming more important as I see my girls get older. I want to find that interest for them in science. So I think being a plant breeder is a good way to introduce them to different levels and different types of science, because agriculture, what a lot of people don't realize is it encompasses, when I say encompass, it includes all kinds of science. It's physiology, biology, meteorology, robotics, genetics, every type of science you can imagine. We use it as plant breeders.
But a lot of people don't think of agriculture as being a highly scientific field.
Well, that's the great thing about you letting me come on your podcast.
Yeah. So, any advice for girls out there trying to make it happen in agricultural science?
Yeah, ask questions. That's the most important thing. Ask questions. Do not be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to get out there and mix it up with the guys. Agriculture, one of my favorite professors when I was in graduate school was a woman, and I really respect her, and she is a great scientist. Her name is Dr. Patricia. Look her up. She's a great geneticist. But no, some of my best mentors in science have been women, so it's really important for me now that I have Cece and Benny to make sure that they have all the information available to pursue a career in science and
All right, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, I'll be posting some informative links about sorghum where